Marcus Sterling grabbed his wife's arm in front of 400 guests, yanked her toward the door, and said into the microphone loud enough for every person in that ballroom to hear, "Security, remove this woman from my event. She is an embarrassment to everything I have built." The room went silent. Clara didn't scream. She didn't beg. She simply looked at her husband of 7 years and felt something inside her go completely, permanently cold. And Marcus had absolutely no idea what that coldness would cost him. Before we go any further, if you're new here, please subscribe and follow this story all the way to the end. Drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. The St. Regis Hotel on Fifth Avenue did not forgive weakness. That was something Clara Sterling had learned within the first 60 seconds of walking through its golden doors. The chandeliers above the grand ballroom were not merely decorations, they were announcements. They said in the clearest possible language that the people gathered beneath them had won at life, and everyone else had simply come to witness it. Clara had been coming to these galas for 4 years. 4 years of standing beside Marcus, straightening his tie, remembering the names of his business associates, smiling at jokes she didn't find funny, and pretending she belonged in a world that had never once made her feel welcome. Tonight was no different, except that tonight something felt different. She couldn't name it. It sat beneath her sternum like a stone, heavy and still, and she kept pressing her fingers against her collarbone as though she could push it away. "Stop fidgeting," Marcus said without looking at her. He was shaking hands with a man named Gerald Foss, a real estate developer from Connecticut, who had more money than patience and wore it on his face like a badge. Marcus laughed at something Gerald said, a real laugh, the kind Clara had not heard from him in over a year, and she stood slightly behind his left shoulder the way she always did, visible enough to be seen and invisible enough to be ignored. "Is this her?" Gerald asked, nodding in Clara's direction. Marcus glanced at her the way you might glance at a piece of furniture you'd forgotten to return. "That's my wife," he said. Gerald looked Clara over with the particular expression of a man who had expected more. He said, and turned back to Marcus. Clara pressed her fingers against her collarbone again. She had worn the blue dress tonight, the one Marcus had told her 3 years ago made her look like she belonged. She'd had it dry cleaned. She'd done her hair herself because the stylist Marcus used had stopped returning her calls months ago, and she hadn't wanted to make a scene about it. She had tried. She always tried. And standing there beneath Gerald Foss's dismissive gaze, she understood with sudden exhausting clarity that it had never mattered. Not once. "Clara!" A voice behind her, sharp, deliberate, and carrying the particular warmth of a knife. Victoria Sterling. Marcus's mother appeared at her elbow in a column of black silk, her white hair swept back in a style that said she had made her decisions and had no regrets about any of them. "You're in the way of the waiters again." Clara stepped aside. "I don't know why you insist on standing in doorways," Victoria continued, accepting a glass of champagne from a passing tray without breaking eye contact with Clara. "It's not as though you're holding the room's attention." "Good evening, Victoria," Clara said. "You look tired." Victoria sipped her champagne. "More tired than usual. Have you been sleeping?" "I'm fine." "You should tell your face that." Victoria smiled the kind of smile that required no warmth to execute, and drifted away toward a cluster of women who received her like a queen returning to court. Clara turned back toward Marcus, but he had already moved further into the room with Gerald Foss, their voices blending into the general noise of 400 people congratulating each other on their own existence. She picked up a glass of sparkling water from a nearby tray and stood still and breathed and told herself what she had been telling herself for 4 years, that this was temporary, that things would change, that she was stronger than this felt. She had been very good at telling herself things that weren't true. The gala was in honor of the New York Children's Medical Fund, a charity that Marcus supported publicly with enormous generosity and privately with the bare minimum required to maintain the optics. Clara had actually read about the fund, had spent an afternoon on their website, learning about the pediatric research programs and the family assistance initiatives, and she had thought briefly about asking Marcus if she could be more involved. She had imagined saying, "I could help coordinate volunteers, or I could reach out to the communications team." She had imagined his reaction, and she had not asked. There were so many things she had not asked. The list had grown so long over 4 years that it had stopped being a list, and had become something closer to a landscape vast and flat and stretching in every direction with no edge in sight. She was standing near the edge of the room beside a tall floral arrangement that smelled aggressively of white roses when she heard the laughter. Not the polite, managed laughter of networking professionals. Real laughter, surprised and delighted and aimed with great precision in her direction. She turned. Sophia Vance was standing 20 feet away with a small group of women, and she was looking directly at Clara with the expression of someone who has just delivered a punchline and is watching it land. Sophia was 28 years old, with the kind of beauty that required both genetics and significant investment, and she was the daughter of Edward Vance, one of the most powerful private bankers in the northeastern United States. She was also, Clara had known for approximately 11 months, the woman her husband was in love with. She knew it the way you know things you haven't been told directly, in the silences and the changed passwords in the business trips that ran 3 days longer than the itinerary required, in the way Marcus had stopped touching her shoulder when he walked past her in the kitchen. She knew it in her body before she knew it in her mind, and by the time her mind caught up, she had already started building the walls she would need to survive it. Sophia crossed the room toward her. Clara did not move. "Clara," Sophia said, stopping a comfortable distance away, close enough to be intimate, far enough to be condescending. "You look lovely tonight. That dress is very classic." "Thank you, Sophia." "Is it vintage?" "It has that quality." Sophia tilted her head, genuinely curious, as though she were examining an artifact rather than a person. "From another era." The women behind her laughed softly. Clara felt the sound against her skin like something physical. "It's from 3 years ago," Clara said. Sophia smiled the way Victoria smiled, with the muscles of her face, only the warmth having been carefully removed at some earlier point in her life. How brave to hold on to things for that long. She walked away. The women followed her. The laughter continued quieter now, and Clara stood beside the white roses and pressed her fingers against her collarbone and breathed. She thought about leaving. She had thought about leaving many times over the past year, not just the party, but the marriage, the apartment, the life she had somehow ended up inside of. She had thought about it, and then she had thought about the practical realities that she had no income of her own, that the bank accounts were in Marcus's name, that her only family had been gone for a long time, and she had no one to call and no place to go. She had thought about it until thinking about it became one more thing on the list of things she couldn't do, and then she had stopped thinking about it and gone back to standing beside Marcus at parties straightening his tie. That was when the waiter came around the corner too fast. Clara saw him a fraction of a second before it happened. A young man in a white jacket carrying a tray of champagne glasses, moving with the particular urgency of someone who has been told to be faster. And then the tray tilted, and 6 glasses became a cascade of sound and liquid and broken crystal, and the entire corner of the room turned to look, and the waiter was on his knees gathering shards with his bare hands, and Clara was already crouching beside him saying, "Don't, you'll cut yourself, wait, let me." "What happened?" Marcus's voice. Clara looked up. He was standing above her, Gerald Foss at his shoulder, and behind Gerald a small crowd had formed, with the instinctive gathering speed of people who sense that something worth watching is occurring. "It was an accident," Clara said. She stood up slowly. The waiter lost his footing. No one was hurt. "An accident." Marcus's voice was level, in the way that dangerous things are sometimes level the stillness before the break. "Do you know what was on that tray? Champagne glasses. They can be replaced, Marcus. One of those glasses was a 1920 Baccarat crystal piece that belongs to the St. Regis collection." His voice was getting quieter. Clara had learned years ago that quieter was worse. "It's irreplaceable." "That's not—" She stopped. She looked at the broken glass on the floor. She looked at the young waiter who was white-faced and still on his knees. "Marcus, he just lost his balance. It's not—" "I saw you," Marcus said. The room went very still. "I beg your pardon," Clara said. "I saw you." His voice was conversational now, which was the worst version of his voice. "I was across the room. I saw you jostle his arm. You've been drinking. I have been drinking sparkling water all evening. And you weren't watching where you were moving, and you destroyed a piece of irreplaceable hotel property, and now you're standing here trying to blame a staff member who is half your size. That is not what happened. Clara's voice was steady. She was surprised by how steady it was. Something had gone very quiet inside her, not the cold quiet of before, but something older and deeper. Marcus, that is not what happened. I know what I saw. You were across the room. I have excellent vision. Marcus? Do not. His voice dropped even lower. The word landed like a period at the end of a very long sentence. And then he turned to the crowd, because there was a crowd now, 40-50 people arranged in a loose circle, and he said clearly and calmly and into the silence that the entire room had gone to in order to listen. I apologize for my wife. She has had too much to drink, which is a pattern that I have been managing privately for some time. And I'm afraid tonight it has become a public matter. The silence deepened. Clara felt something happen inside her chest. She could not have described it precisely. It was not pain. She had moved past pain some time ago. It was something closer to finality. The way a door sounds when it closes, and you understand from the click of the latch that it will not be opening again. That's a lie, she said. Her voice carried. She had not planned for it to carry, but the room was so quiet that even a normal voice would have carried. And her voice was not entirely normal at that moment. It was tight and controlled and threaded through with something that had been building for 7 years and had just reached its limit. That is a lie, she said again. I did not touch that tray. I did not jostle anyone. I was standing still when it fell, and I have not been drinking. Marcus turned back to her slowly. The look on his face was one she recognized. She had seen it twice before, both times in private, both times followed by consequences that had taken months to recover from. But they had never been in public before. He had always been careful about that. The public version of Marcus was disappointed, long-suffering managing. The private version was something else. Tonight she understood he had decided to stop being careful. You need to stop talking, he said. No. The word surprised him. She could see it a flicker, quickly controlled. He was not accustomed to that word from her. She had given it to him so rarely over the years that it had lost any reality for him. It had become theoretical, something she was capable of in principle, but had never demonstrated in practice. And here it was, one small word standing in the middle of the ballroom of the St. Regis Hotel in front of 400 people refusing to move. Clara. His voice had a warning in it now. I'm going to ask you one more time, and I'm going to tell you one more time that you are lying. She could hear her own heartbeat. She wondered if anyone else could. You did not see what you said you saw, and everyone in this room who was actually nearby knows that. And you are standing here in front of all of these people telling a lie about your wife to cover the embarrassment of a broken glass, and I will not agree with you. I won't do it. The silence had a texture now. She could feel it pressing against her from all sides, 500 pairs of eyes, the weight of it enormous. And beneath that weight, something extraordinary. She was still standing. She had not apologized. She had not backed down. After 7 years in the most public room she had ever been in, she was still standing. Marcus looked at her for a long moment, and then something changed in his face, something resolved like a decision being made in real time, and he turned and looked toward the 2 security personnel stationed near the main entrance. Remove her, he said. A murmur went through the crowd. One of the security men took a step forward, then hesitated, looking from Marcus to Clara with the uncomfortable expression of a man who has not been paid enough to make this particular call. Remove her, Marcus said again, sharper. She's disrupting a charity event. That is my wife, and I am asking you to escort her out of this building. Marcus, Victoria Sterling appeared at his elbow, her voice low and urgent. Even Victoria Clara noticed distantly, looked uncertain, not about the rightness of what Marcus was doing, but about the wisdom of doing it so visibly, so loudly, so completely, without plausible deniability. Perhaps we should— Mother, he said her name the way you'd say enough. This is handled. The security man made his decision. He crossed the room toward Clara with the careful, controlled movement of someone trying to make an unpleasant thing look administrative. He stopped 2 feet in front of her and said quietly, Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to come with me. Clara looked at him. He was perhaps 30 years old, with tired eyes and the posture of someone who had seen enough of other people's disasters that one more no longer surprised him. She felt unexpectedly a wave of sorrow, not for herself, but for him, for the position he'd been put in, for the particular loneliness of being a person without power who is asked to enforce the will of people with too much of it. "All right," she said. Her voice was very quiet. "I'll go." She did not look at Marcus as she walked toward the door. She made a decision about that she would not give him the satisfaction of a final glance, would not let him see her face in the moment of her leaving, because whatever was on her face in that moment was hers, and she was keeping it. The crowd parted to let her through. Nobody spoke. Somebody she couldn't see who made a soft, dismissive sound, and she walked past it, the way you walk past something on the sidewalk that you've decided not to look at. The lobby of the St. Regis was enormous and cold, and echoing with the particular emptiness of a grand space between moments. Her heels sounded very loud. The security man walked beside her, but slightly behind, as though he wasn't sure whether he was escorting her or following her, and had settled on a compromise. At the main entrance, he held the door open. She walked through it. The October air hit her like a decision. Cold and clean and smelling of exhaust and rain that hadn't fallen yet. The awning above the entrance extended only so far, and beyond its reach the street was dark and wet-looking under the lights, and Fifth Avenue was doing what Fifth Avenue always did, moving regardless. "I'm sorry, ma'am," the security man said from behind her. "You were doing your job," she said. "Yes, ma'am." She heard the door close behind him. She stood under the edge of the awning and breathed. One breath. Two. The stone beneath her sternum was gone. She realized that with a kind of distant surprise. It had been there for so long that its absence felt like something had been removed, like a splinter drawn out that you hadn't known was infected until the pressure released. What was in its place was something she couldn't name yet. Not hope, she was too honest with herself for that. Not peace. Something more elemental. Something that felt like the ground. She had her phone in her small evening bag. She had $40 in cash. She had no coat. It was in the cloakroom, and she was not going back inside to retrieve it. And the rain that had been threatening since early evening was beginning to arrive. Now tentative at first, then committed, and she had nowhere to go. She thought about calling a car. She thought about going to the apartment, but it was Marcus's apartment. His name on the lease, his code on the keypad, and she understood with sudden practical clarity that she would not be returning to that apartment. Not tonight. Possibly not ever. Whatever came next would not include that apartment. She thought about calling a friend. The list was short. Over 4 years of marriage, the list had shortened dramatically, a slow erosion that she had noticed, but not until this moment fully understood as the deliberate project it had been. Marcus had not liked her friends. He had not said so directly. He had simply made gatherings difficult, had been subtly unpleasant to the people she loved until they stopped coming around, had created enough ambient friction that the friendships had abraded away one by one until the list was reduced to people she texted occasionally but had not seen in months. She stood in the rain and held her phone and could not think of a single person to call. And then she thought of him. She hadn't thought of him, really thought of him, let the thought go all the way rather than catching it at the door and turning it back in years. She had trained herself not to the way you train yourself, not to touch something that has burned you, even when the burn was your own doing, even when you were the one who walked away. She had walked away. At 23 years old, in the middle of a grief so overwhelming that it had rearranged her entirely, she had walked away from the one person who had tried to reach her because reaching back had felt like more than she was capable of. Silas Thorne, her grandfather. She hadn't spoken to him in 15 years. She pressed her fingers against her collarbone, the habit of a difficult year, this gesture, and she was only now understanding what it had been a substitute for. And she stood in the rain on Fifth Avenue, with mascara beginning its slow migration down her face, and $40 and no coat, and she did something she had not done in 15 years. She thought about her grandfather. She thought about his voice, low and deliberate, and always slightly amused by the world, as though he had seen enough of it to know that its disasters were temporary and its beauty was worth noting. She thought about his hands, large and warm and capable of the particular steadiness that some people carry in their bodies, the kind you feel when someone touches your shoulder and you understand that they will not leave. She thought about the last time she had seen him, which had been at her parents' funeral, which had been the worst day of her life, which had been the day she had looked at his face, grief-struck and old, and reaching toward her, and had turned away because she could not bear one more thing that she loved and might lose. She had spent 15 years not losing him. She had accomplished this by never letting him close enough to be lost. She stood in the rain. Inside the St. Regis Hotel, 400 people were still at a gala. Marcus Sterling was almost certainly already back to his champagne, already explaining to Gerald Foss that he'd had to deal with a family situation, already performing the managed regret of a powerful man burdened by a difficult wife. Sophia Vance was there watching him, and the watching had the patient quality of a person who knows that what she's waiting for is almost within reach. Victoria Sterling was there, recalibrating, deciding which version of tonight's story would be most useful to her in the days ahead. And out here on Fifth Avenue in the rain, Clara Sterling was standing in a blue dress that was 3 years old, with her mascara running and her hands empty, and her heart doing something she couldn't quite categorize. Not breaking, exactly. Breaking would have implied it was still whole. Something more like clearing, like the moment before a storm resolves when the pressure has been building for so long that even the release is almost welcome because at least it's real. Her phone buzzed. She looked at it. Marcus, come back inside and apologize and we can discuss this privately. She read it twice. She put her phone back in her bag. The rain was heavier now. She stepped back further under the awning, but the wind was coming sideways and it reached her anyway, and the blue dress was not made for October in New York, and she was very cold, and she was for the first time in a very long time entirely clear about exactly where she stood. She was alone. She had nothing. She had nowhere to go. And somehow, and this was the part she couldn't explain, not then, not even later, when she had time and distance to look back at it, somehow standing there in the rain, with all of that being precisely true, she felt something in the center of her chest begin very slowly to open. She did not know what was coming. She could not have known. She had no way to understand that 14 blocks uptown, a convoy of black SUVs was already moving through traffic, unhurried and absolute. The way that real power moves not fast, not loud, but with the particular certainty of something that has already decided what it's going to do and is simply completing the distance between itself and its destination. She did not know that the man in the center vehicle, white-haired, broad-shouldered, with large hands, and a voice low and deliberate and threaded through with 15 years of searching, had been given an address 40 minutes ago and had said simply quietly to the men around him, "Take me there." She did not know any of that. She stood in the rain on Fifth Avenue cold and clear, and finally done pretending that anything about her life as it had been constructed was going to be okay. And in that not knowing, in that particular cold dark of a life that has reached its end and has not yet become anything new, she stood still. She breathed. She pressed her fingers against her collarbone one more time, and then she let her hand fall to her side. She was done with that gesture. She understood, without knowing why she understood it, that she would not need it again. Whatever she had been pressing against, whatever she had been trying to contain or hold in or protect, it was already gone. It had left the moment she said no in the middle of a ballroom with 400 people watching. It had left her standing here in its absence, and the absence was huge and cold, and strangely, surprisingly, something she could breathe inside. The rain came down. The lights of Fifth Avenue reflected up from the wet street in long, shimmering columns, and Clara Sterling stood at the edge of one life and the beginning of something she could not yet see, and she waited, though she did not know she was waiting, and she did not know what was coming, and the city moved around her indifferent and enormous, and full, as it always was, of things that had not happened yet. The rain did not let up. Clara had been standing outside the St. Regis for 11 minutes. She knew because she had looked at her phone 11 times, not to check the hour, but because holding something familiar in her hand made the ground feel slightly more real beneath her feet. Her dress was soaked through. The blue fabric had gone dark and heavy against her skin, and her broken heel had made walking even the 3 steps to the edge of the awning feel like a negotiation with gravity. She had stopped trying to fix her hair. She had stopped trying to fix anything. Inside, through the tall glass doors, she could see the warm amber glow of the ballroom, the shapes of people moving, the occasional flash of a camera. The party continued. Of course it continued. The world did not pause for a woman standing in the rain with $40 and a cracked phone screen and no particular destination. Her phone buzzed again. It was not Marcus this time. It was a number she didn't recognize, a 212 area code Manhattan, but no name attached. She stared at it for 3 full seconds before she answered, because something in her chest moved when she saw it. Not recognition exactly. Something older than recognition. Something cellular. Hello? Silence on the line. Then breathing. Then a voice she had not heard in 15 years, low, deliberate, with that particular quality of stillness that she had spent a decade and a half trying to forget because remembering it hurt too much. Clara. Her hand tightened around the phone so hard her knuckles went white. Grandfather, she whispered. Silas Thorne did not rush his words. He never had. Even now, even in this moment, his voice came out measured and warm and carrying the particular weight of a man who has learned that patience is not weakness, but the most powerful thing a person can possess. I know where you are, he said. I've been looking for you for a long time. She opened her mouth, closed it. The rain came down. You need to stay exactly where you are, Silas said. Don't move. Don't go back inside. I'm already close. How did you... She stopped. How did you find me? I never stopped looking. A pause, brief but weighted with everything that 15 years contains. I should have found you sooner. That's on me. But I'm here now, Clara. I'm here. She pressed her free hand flat against her sternum, not the old gesture, the pressing against the collarbone habit of a difficult year, but something different, something that was trying to keep her heart inside her body, which felt in that moment like a reasonable concern. Okay, she said. Her voice was barely a sound. Okay, he said back, and hung up. She stood in the rain and shook not from cold, though she was very cold, but from something that did not have a clean name. Relief was part of it. Terror was part of it. The particular vertigo of a door opening that you had sealed shut so long ago that you had stopped believing it was a door at all. Inside the St. Regis, the party continued without her. Marcus Sterling was not thinking about Clara. This was not unusual. He had stopped thinking about Clara in any meaningful way approximately 2 years ago, when she had shifted in his mind from a person to a variable, something to be managed rather than considered. But tonight was different. Tonight he had made a public decision, and public decisions have a particular momentum, and he was riding it now with the particular aliveness that comes from finally doing something you have been working toward for a long time. He was standing with Sophia at the far end of the ballroom near the bar, their bodies angled toward each other in the way that people angle toward each other when they have stopped bothering to pretend they aren't in love. Sophia had her hand on his forearm. She was smiling a real smile, the kind that rearranges your entire face, and Marcus was looking at her the way he had not looked at Clara since the very first year of their marriage, before the weight of keeping up appearances had made every genuine thing between them feel like an expense he couldn't afford. You actually did it, Sophia said. I told you I would. I know you told me. She squeezed his arm. I just didn't know if you'd actually... She laughed softly. Do it in front of 400 people. It needed to be done. He picked up his drink. It needed to be public. Sophia studied him for a moment with those careful, calculating eyes that he had always read as admiration. The vase story was a nice touch, she said. He glanced at her sideways. The vase story was true. Marcus. She said his name with a small, patient smile. I'm the one who nudged the waiter's arm. He went very still. You needed a reason, Sophia said, as though this were a perfectly ordinary thing to say in a perfectly ordinary conversation. You've needed a reason for months. I just helped it arrive. She tilted her head. You're not angry with me. He looked at her for a long moment, and then slowly he said, No, I'm not angry with you. Because he wasn't. That was the thing that was the detail that would come back to him later in the months when everything was falling apart, and he was trying to reconstruct the exact series of choices that had led him there. He was not angry. He was grateful. He had looked at Sophia in that moment and felt grateful that she had done a cruel thing to a person he had once promised to protect, and he had felt nothing about that except relief. That was who Marcus Sterling had become. He just didn't know it yet. What he also didn't know, what neither of them knew, standing there in their satisfaction in the warmth of the ballroom with the rain outside and the future feeling large and available, was that in another part of the room a conversation had just ended that would change everything. Gerald Foss was on his phone. Gerald Foss was always on his phone. This was not unusual. What was unusual was the expression on his face, a particular tightening around the eyes and mouth that Gerald's associates recognized as the expression he wore when information arrived that required immediate recalibration. He had stepped away from his table, moved to the edge of the room near the coat check, and was speaking in a voice low enough that only the person on the other end of the line could hear him. What Gerald Foss was hearing from his chief financial officer was that the Thorne Group, one of the oldest and most powerful private holding companies in North America, had just made 3 simultaneous moves in the markets in the last 20 minutes. Moves that affected, among other things, a very specific set of assets belonging to a very specific set of companies. Sterling Tech was on the list. Gerald Foss looked across the room at Marcus Sterling, who was laughing at something Sophia had said, who had no idea who was standing in his good suit in his good ballroom with his new future arranged in front of him like a dinner he had ordered himself. And Gerald Foss thought, with the quick, clean calculation of a man who has survived in money long enough to know which direction the current is moving, that he needed to make a phone call of his own. Outside, the convoy arrived. Clara heard it before she saw it. The particular sound of serious vehicles moving in formation, low engine, unhurried, the sound of something that does not need to announce itself because its presence is already announcement enough. 3 black SUVs moving in a line pulled to the curb in front of the St. Regis with the calm deliberateness of something that has arrived exactly when it intended to. The rear door of the center vehicle opened. Silas Thorne stepped out. He was 81 years old, and he moved like a man who had made peace with every year of it. Not slowly, not with difficulty, but with the unhurried certainty of someone who understands that time is not running out, but simply running. He was broad-shouldered in a dark overcoat, white-haired, and his face, the face Clara had been trying for 15 years to stop seeing in her dreams, was the face of someone who has been searching for a long time and has just found what they were looking for. He saw her immediately. She was standing at the edge of the awning, soaked through her broken heel in her hand, because she had finally taken the shoe off her mascara long since migrated to places mascara was not intended to go. She was 38 years old, and she looked in that moment like the 23-year-old who had turned away from him at a funeral and walked out of his life, except that she also looked like something that 23-year-old could not have been someone who had survived a very long time on very little and was still standing. Silas Thorne crossed the sidewalk in 10 steps and stopped directly in front of her. Neither of them spoke for a moment. "You look like your mother," he said finally. His voice was steady, but his eyes were not. Clara made a sound that was not quite a word. Her throat had closed entirely. "She had that same expression," he said, when she was backed into a corner and refusing to show it. He reached out and took her hand, both hands wrapping them in his, which were exactly as she remembered, large and warm, and carrying that steadiness that you feel in your body before you feel it anywhere else. "You're freezing." "I'm fine," she said. Old reflex. "You're not fine," he said, "but you will be." He looked at her for another long moment, really looked the way that people rarely look at each other, taking in the whole of something without flinching from any of it. "Can you tell me what happened tonight?" "He threw me out," she said, "in front of everyone. He told them I was—" She stopped. The word still had weight. "He said I was trash." Something moved across Silas Thorne's face. It was not an expression she had a name for. It was quieter than anger and more absolute. It was the expression of a man who has just received a piece of information that has moved directly from his ears into the part of him where decisions are made, skipping entirely the part where feelings are processed. "All right," he said, "just that, all right." He put his arm around her shoulders and guided her toward the vehicle, and one of his men was already holding the door, and there was warmth inside, and Clara got in and the door closed, and she sat in the back of a black SUV on Fifth Avenue and put her face in her hands and breathed. From the front of the vehicle, Silas spoke to someone on his phone. His voice was very quiet. She could catch only pieces of it, words like tonight and immediately and all of it, but the tone was unmistakable. It was the tone of someone setting something in motion that once set in motion would not be stopped. Inside the St. Regis, Marcus Sterling's phone lit up. He looked at it with the mild irritation of a man who has decided the evening is his and resents any interruption. It was Richard Cho, his CFO, his meticulous, unflappable CFO, who had not called him at a social event in 3 years. He stepped away from Sophia and answered it. "Richard, this is not a good time." "I know, sir." Richard's voice had a quality Marcus had never heard in it before. Not panic. Richard was too precise for panic, but something adjacent, something controlled and urgent in the way that a person is controlled and urgent when they are trying to transmit the seriousness of a situation without causing the person they're talking to do something impulsive. "I need 4 minutes of your attention. It's about the Mercer deal." The Mercer deal was Marcus's most important pending acquisition, a merger 18 months in the making that was supposed to close in 11 days that would expand Sterling Tech's infrastructure division by 40%. That was the centerpiece of everything Marcus had been building for the last 3 years. "What about it?" Marcus said. "The Thorne Group made a move tonight," Richard said, "about 40 minutes ago. 3 coordinated positions, 2 in our primary lending partners, and 1 directly in Mercer's parent company." A pause. "Marcus, if those positions hold through Monday, our leverage ratio on the acquisition falls apart. The deal can't close." Marcus was quiet for exactly 4 seconds. "The Thorne Group," he said. "Yes, sir." "Silas Thorne. His organization, yes." Another silence. Marcus's jaw tightened. "That's not a coincidence." "No, sir," Richard said. "It is very much not a coincidence." "Find out what they want," Marcus said. "Tonight. Whatever you need to do, find out what they want and call me back." He hung up. He stood at the edge of the ballroom with his phone in his hand and felt something he had not felt in a very long time, something that lived below confidence and above fear, in the narrow corridor where powerful people live when they realize that someone else in the room might be more powerful. He thought about the Thorne Group. He knew the name. Everyone in his world knew the name. Silas Thorne was not a man you encountered directly if you lived in Marcus's tier of the financial world. Silas Thorne was 2 or 3 levels above Marcus's tier. Silas Thorne was the kind of wealth that doesn't attend galas. It funds the buildings the galas are held in. The kind of power that doesn't negotiate. It simply rearranges the landscape and lets everyone else adjust. What Marcus could not understand, what his mind kept sliding off unable to find purchase, was why. Why tonight? Why now? Why these specific moves aimed with such precision at the exact architecture of his most important deal? He did not yet know about the black SUVs outside. He did not yet know about the phone call in the rain. He did not yet know that the answer to every question forming in his mind was standing at that very moment in the warm interior of a vehicle on Fifth Avenue, her hands wrapped in her grandfather's, learning for the first time in 15 years what it felt like to not be alone. He went back to Sophia. He didn't tell her what Richard had said. He picked up his drink and he smiled and he let her talk, and behind his eyes the calculations were already running. In the vehicle, Silas was speaking. "I need to tell you something," he said to Clara, "and I need you to hear it completely before you respond to any part of it." Clara nodded. She had stopped shaking. The warmth of the car and the warmth of his presence had done something to her nervous system. Reset it almost the way that genuine safety does, when your body has been running on emergency power for long enough that it has forgotten what the other setting feels like. "Your parents left things in order," Silas said. "When they died, when I lost my daughter and her husband, everything they had passed to me in trust. For you." He looked at her directly. "I have been managing it for 15 years, waiting for you to come back, waiting until I could find you in a moment when you could actually hear it." "What are you saying?" Clara said. Her voice was careful. "I'm saying that your parents were not wealthy people," Silas said. But I am. And I am 81 years old, and I have no other family in this world except you, and I have had my attorneys working on this for 7 years, and it is done. It has been done." He paused. "You are my sole heir, Clara. Everything I have built, every company, every asset, every piece of the Thorn Group, it goes to you. It has your name on it already." The silence in the vehicle was absolute. "Grandfather, I know it's a great deal to hear all at once," he said. "I know tonight has been—" He paused, and something moved across his face again, that quiet anger that lived below words. "Tonight has been a great deal, but I need you to understand your position. Not tomorrow. Tonight." His eyes were steady on hers. "Because tomorrow things are going to begin moving, and I need you to understand what you're standing on when they do." Clara looked at her grandfather. She looked at his face, the face she had turned away from at a funeral when she was 23, and grief-wrecked and incapable of accepting anything good. And she understood several things simultaneously, the way you sometimes do in moments of extreme clarity. She understood that she had been alone for 15 years when she did not have to be. She understood that the life she had built inside her marriage to Marcus Sterling, the enduring, the managing, the staying, had been built on a foundation of believing she had no other options, and that belief had been wrong from the beginning. She understood that Marcus Sterling had humiliated his wife in front of 400 people tonight, and that his wife was the sole heir to one of the most powerful private fortunes in North America. And she understood with a clarity that was almost physical that Marcus Sterling did not know any of this, that he had thrown her out into the rain in profound and total ignorance of what he was throwing away, that the woman he had called garbage was at this very moment sitting in a vehicle that cost more than his first apartment with a man who could dismantle his entire financial world before the gala ended. She looked at her grandfather. "You said things are going to move," she said. "What things?" Silas Thorne, 81 years old, patient and absolute as stone, allowed himself a very small smile. "The Mercer acquisition that Marcus Sterling has been building for 18 months, he said. "As of 40 minutes ago, it cannot close." He watched her face. "His two primary lending partners are now in positions that make his leverage ratio non-viable. I also took a position in Mercer's parent company that will trigger a review clause in the acquisition agreement. The deal is effectively dead." Clara stared at him. "You did that tonight, within 30 minutes of making certain phone calls." He paused. "I've been watching Marcus Sterling for 7 months, Clara. Since I found out where you were, I have been watching his business, his finances, his methods." The small smile was gone now. "What he did to you tonight, what he has been doing to you for years, I was already prepared for this conversation. I simply needed tonight to happen before I could have it." "Why?" she asked. "Why did you need tonight?" "Because I needed you to be ready to leave," he said simply, "and I needed you to have left on your own terms, standing up before I arrived, not rescued." He looked at her steadily. "Your mother was proud. You are proud too. I know my granddaughter. You would not have accepted this if I had arrived before you had already made your own decision." A pause. "Did you—" Clara thought about in the moment in the ballroom. The word no standing in the middle of the room, refusing to move. The walk to the door with her chin level. The security guard saying, "I'm sorry, ma'am," and her saying you were doing your job. "Yes," she said quietly. "I made my own decision." "Good," Silas said. "Then we can begin." His phone rang. He answered it, listened for 30 seconds, and said 3 words, "Take care of it," and hung up. He turned to Clara. "Richard Cho just called Marcus. He now knows that the Thorn Group is involved." Clara absorbed this. "What will Marcus do?" "What men like Marcus always do when they feel the ground shifting," Silas said. "He'll look for leverage. He'll try to understand the connection. He'll make phone calls." He paused. "He'll be looking for a way to reach me." "And when he finds out about me," Clara asked, "when he finds out that I'm—" "That is not a moment I intend to leave to chance," Silas said. "When Marcus Sterling learns the full truth about his wife, I want us to be in the same room. I want to see his face." He looked at Clara. "I want you to see his face." Clara was quiet for a moment. Outside, the rain continued. Fifth Avenue moved in its indifferent, enormous way, full of people who had no idea that anything extraordinary was occurring in a black SUV at the curb of the St. Regis. "He humiliated me in front of 400 people," Clara said. "Yes." "He called me garbage." "Yes." "He had me physically removed from a charity event." "Yes." Silas's voice was steady and warm and utterly unafraid of any of it. Clara looked out the window, then back at her grandfather. Then she said something she had not said to another human being in 15 years, something she had not known until this moment that she had been saving. "I want to go back in," she said. Silas Thorne looked at his granddaughter for a long moment, and then for the first time since he had stepped out of that vehicle onto Fifth Avenue, he smiled a real smile, full and unhurried, the smile of a man who has waited a very long time for something and is watching it arrive exactly as he hoped it would. "Then let's go back in," he said. He spoke to his driver. The convoy did not move immediately. There were phone calls to make people to position a few specific arrangements that needed to be in place before they walked through those doors. Silas worked his phone with the efficient calm of a man for whom rearranging large things is simply what Tuesday looks like. Clara sat beside him and listened, and began for the first time in a very long time to understand the shape of the world she actually lived in. Meanwhile, inside the St. Regis, the shape of Marcus Sterling's world was already beginning to change. Gerald Foss had made his phone calls. 3 of Marcus's most significant business allies, men who had been in his corner for years, men whose presence at his table had always been a statement about his standing, were now doing their own calculations. When Gerald Foss moves carefully, other careful men notice. Foss was not a man who panicked. The fact that he was quietly making calls at a charity gala away from the crowd told everyone watching him everything they needed to know about the seriousness of what he had heard. By the time Marcus made his way back to his table, 2 of his allies had found reasons to be elsewhere. Small things: a wife who needed to leave early, a car that had arrived, the kind of departures that look casual and are not. Marcus noticed. He was a man who had built his entire career on reading rooms, and this room was changing its temperature, and he did not know why, and not knowing why was the thing that scared him most. Sophia noticed too. She noticed the way she noticed everything quietly, with her eyes filing it away. She put her hand on Marcus's arm and felt the tension in it, and said nothing, because Sophia Vance had not gotten where she was by talking, when listening was more useful. And in the lobby of the St. Regis Hotel, a man in a dark coat spoke briefly to the concierge. The concierge picked up the phone and spoke to the ballroom manager. The ballroom manager spoke to the event coordinator. And a space was quietly, efficiently cleared near the center of the room. 2 tables rearranged a sightline, opened up in preparation for the arrival of guests who had not been on the original list, but whose presence the concierge had understood immediately was not optional. The revolving door of the St. Regis began to turn. Silas Thorne walked through it, first unhurried, absolute, the way that real power moves. And beside him, in the same blue dress, with the same broken heel, now simply held in her hand because she had decided she was done, pretending things weren't broken, with her mascara gone, and her hair wet, and her spine straight as a rod, Clara Sterling walked back into the building that had thrown her out 40 minutes ago. She did not look like a woman who had been humiliated. She looked like a woman who had made a decision. The lobby staff straightened unconsciously as they passed. It was the kind of thing that happens in the presence of certain people, not because anyone has been told to do it, but because the body knows before the mind does when something significant has entered the room. They walked toward the ballroom. The doors were ahead. On the other side of those doors, Marcus Sterling was calculating his next move, and Sophia Vance was watching him, and 400 people were going about the business of a charity gala, and none of them knew, not one single person in that gilded room, that everything was about to become irreversible. Clara's hand found her grandfather's arm. She held it. "Ready," he said. She thought about 7 years. She thought about 40 minutes in the rain. She thought about the word no standing in the middle of a room refusing to move. "Yes," she said. The doors opened. The ballroom doors opened, and the sound hit first. 400 people, the clink of crystal, the low roar of 100 conversations running simultaneously, and then in the space of about 3 seconds a ripple. The way sound changes in a room when something enters that the room did not expect. It started near the door and moved outward in a wave conversation, dropping in pitch and volume as eyes found the entrance and stayed there. And the wave kept moving table by table until the far end of the room had gone quieter too, not silent, but listening. Clara felt it. She felt the moment the room recognized that something had changed, and she kept walking. Silas moved beside her with the particular unhurried quality that she was already relearning the way he occupied space, not aggressively, but completely, the way that people who have never needed to prove anything move through the world. Two of his men followed at a respectful distance. The event coordinator appeared from somewhere to their left, moving quickly, and bent briefly toward Silas to confirm the arrangements. Silas nodded once, and the man disappeared again. They did not go to the periphery. They walked toward the center of the room, Clara's bare feet on the marble she had left. The broken shoes entirely in the lobby made no sound, but she felt every step in her body, each one deliberate, each one a word in a sentence she was writing in real time. She was wet. Her dress was still dark with rain. Her hair was not fixed. She had made a decision in the lobby not to fix any of it. She had stood in front of the mirror above the concierge desk for 30 seconds and looked at herself. This woman who had been called garbage, who had been pushed through a door, who had stood in the rain with $40 and a cracked phone, and she had thought, let them see exactly what was done tonight. Let there be no ambiguity about it. So she walked in exactly as she had walked out, and she held her grandfather's arm, and she did not look at the floor. The first person to see her clearly was Victoria Sterling. Victoria was standing near the center left of the room with two women from her social circle, and she had her champagne glass halfway to her lips when she saw Clara walk through those doors, and the glass stopped. Just stopped, suspended in midair, and Victoria's face went through three expressions in rapid succession: shock, calculation, and then something that Clara had never seen on Victoria Sterling's face in 7 years of marriage, something that looked almost like the beginning of fear. Victoria's eyes moved from Clara to the man beside her, and stayed there. She knew who Silas Thorne was. Of course she did. In the world, Victoria Sterling inhabited the world of old money and older influence, where power was measured not in headlines, but in who returned whose calls. Silas Thorne was not a name. He was a category. He was the kind of man that women like Victoria spoke about in the careful, reverent tones reserved for things that exist above the level at which your own life operates. Victoria set her champagne glass down on the nearest table. Her hand, Clara noticed with distant satisfaction, was not entirely steady. Across the room, Marcus had not yet seen them. He was at his table, his back 3/4 turned toward the entrance, deep in a conversation with two men that Clara recognized as his legal team, quiet, urgent, the body language of people discussing something that cannot wait. Richard Cho's call had clearly accelerated things. Marcus's right hand was flat on the table, pressing down, which was what he did when he was controlling himself. Clara knew that gesture. She had spent 7 years learning his gestures the way you learn the warning signs of weather. Sophia saw them first. Sophia was facing the entrance from across the table, and she saw Clara walk through the doors, and for one fraction of a second, one unguarded, involuntary fraction, her face showed exactly what she felt. It was not guilt. Clara registered that clearly. It was not remorse. It was something sharper and colder, the look of someone who has made a careful plan and is watching an unexpected variable enter the equation. Then Sophia's eyes moved to Silas Thorne, and her face went absolutely still. Sophia Vance was 28 years old and the daughter of one of the most powerful private bankers on the East Coast, and she had grown up in rooms full of significant men, and she knew with the bone-deep instinct of someone raised to read power, the way other children are raised to read clocks, exactly who she was looking at. She knew it the way you know a storm is coming before the sky changes color. Something in her chest shifted. She picked up her phone under the table, and her thumbs moved fast. Marcus felt the phone buzz. He glanced at it under the table. Sophia's message said 3 words, "Don't turn around," which meant, of course, that he turned around immediately. He saw Clara first. His expression did the thing that faces do when the brain receives information it has categorized as impossible, a kind of stuttering, a delay between the seeing and the processing. Clara. Here. Walking back in, wet dress, bare feet, and her chin level, her eyes forward, her spine straight as a verdict. and then his eyes moved to the man beside her. Marcus Sterling was a man who had spent 20 years building a world, and he understood in the space of one breath that the world he had built was currently standing next to his wife. He did not move. He could not move. His hands were flat on the table, and his body had made the ancient, involuntary calculation of a creature that has just understood it is not at the top of the food chain. "Who is that?" he said. It was not a question. It was the sound of a man trying to buy 3 seconds. His lawyer, James Whitfield, turned and looked, and James Whitfield had been practicing corporate law in New York for 30 years and had the particular stillness of a man who has seen many difficult situations, and even James Whitfield went quiet for a moment before he said carefully, "That is Silas Thorne." "I know who it is," Marcus said. His voice was very controlled. "What is he doing here?" "He appears," James said, with the measured care of a man delivering a diagnosis, "to be with your wife." The silence at Marcus's table was total. Sophia leaned forward. "Marcus," her voice was low, urgent, "listen to me. We need to move to a private room, right now, before what?" Marcus said. "Before he gets to the center of this room," Sophia said. "Because if Silas Thorne reaches the center of this room with Clara, whatever he's going to say it in front of everyone, and you will not be able to manage the narrative afterward. You need to intercept them, now, privately." Marcus looked at Sophia. He looked at Clara, still moving through the crowd, still unhurried, still with that straight spine and that level chin. He looked at Silas Thorne, who had not looked at Marcus yet, who was speaking to Clara, saying something close to her ear, something that made Clara nod once, with the firm, decisive nod of someone receiving confirmation of a decision they've already made. "You're right," Marcus said. He stood up. James Whitfield said, "Marcus, I strongly advise." "I'll handle it," Marcus said. He moved through the room toward them. The crowd had thinned in the space between people, drifting slightly aside in that unconscious social way, creating a corridor. Marcus moved through it with his shoulders back and his jaw set, and the expression of a man who has decided that confidence is the only tool he has left, and he's going to use it. He reached them when they were 20 feet from the center of the room. "Silas Thorne," he said. He said it with a smile, the professional smile, the one he used in boardrooms when the other side of the table had a better position and he needed to buy time. "I had no idea you'd be joining us tonight. I'm Marcus Sterling." He extended his hand. "I believe you know I know exactly who you are," Silas said. He did not take the extended hand. He did not even look at it. He looked at Marcus's face with the patient, absolute attention of a man who has already decided what he thinks and is simply confirming it. Marcus let his hand drop. The smile stayed. The smile was doing a great deal of work now with very little support. "You've met my wife," Marcus said. He turned the smile toward Clara, and Clara felt it, the way you feel something cold automatically in the body before the mind catches up. "Darling, I'm glad you came back. I think there was some confusion earlier, and I'd love the chance to—" "Marcus." Clara's voice was quiet. It was not the quiet of someone who has nothing to say. It was the quiet of someone who has chosen exactly what they're going to say, and everything else has been set aside. "Stop talking." The corridor of space around them had held. People nearby were listening. They were trying to look like they weren't listening, which is what people do when they absolutely are. Marcus's smile flickered. "Clara." "I said stop." She looked at him steadily. Not with anger. She had moved past the anger somewhere in the rain, somewhere between the 11th time she'd checked her phone and the moment she'd heard her grandfather's voice. What she looked at him with was something cleaner and more final than anger. "You'll have an opportunity to speak. That moment is not right now." Marcus looked from Clara to Silas. Something was shifting in his face, the confidence thinning the calculation beneath it showing through. He turned back to Silas. "Whatever Clara has told you tonight, I want you to know that marriages are complicated and—" "Mr. Sterling," Silas's voice was not loud. It had no need to be loud. "I did not come here to have a conversation with you about your marriage. I came here because my granddaughter was standing in the rain outside this building with a broken shoe and no coat because you had her removed from a public event and told a room full of people that she was trash." A pause. "I came to correct a misunderstanding." "Your granddaughter," Marcus said. His voice had gone strange, thin and careful, the voice of a man walking on ice and testing each step. "My granddaughter," Silas said, "my sole heir, the woman whose name is already on the documents that govern the entirety of the Thorn Group's holdings." He let that land. He was patient about it, he gave it room. "Your wife, Mr. Sterling, is one of the wealthiest women in North America. She simply didn't know it yet." The ice cracked. Marcus's face did something that faces rarely do in public. It showed the truth. Just for a moment, just for 3 or 4 seconds, before the control came back, the mask came entirely off. The shock, the calculation, the sick-stomach realization of what he had done and what it meant. Clara watched it happen and felt nothing in particular except a quiet, distant recognition. There he is. That's who you married. That's who was always in there behind the smile. "That's," Marcus started. "Documented," Silas said. "Legally established, irrevocable." He looked at Marcus with the calm of someone who has never needed to raise his voice in his life. "Your Mercer acquisition cannot close. Your lending partners are in positions that make your leverage ratio non-viable. By Monday morning, your CFO will have confirmed all of this." He paused. "I imagine Richard Cho has already started that conversation." Marcus went pale. Not gradually, suddenly, the color just leaving his face, the way water leaves a glass when it tips. Around them, the room had gone quiet in a spreading circle. People who had been pretending not to listen had stopped pretending. The particular electricity of a significant public moment, the kind that people will describe in detail to people who weren't there, had filled the air and everyone felt it and nobody moved. Victoria Sterling appeared at Marcus's elbow. She had crossed the room while Marcus was speaking, moving with the controlled urgency of a woman who understands that damage control has a window and the window is closing. "Marcus," she said low and tight, "we need to move this." "Victoria." Silas looked at her, just looked. One look level and brief, and Victoria Sterling, who had intimidated and maneuvered and controlled every social situation she had been in for 40 years, stopped speaking mid-sentence. "I know about the prenuptial agreement your son had drafted without Clara's knowledge in the 2nd year of their marriage. I know about the asset reclassifications that were made in Sterling Tech's books 18 months ago. I know about the communication between your family's estate attorney and Marcus's personal accountant in March of last year." He paused. "All of it has been shared with the appropriate people." Victoria's face went the color of old paper. Marcus turned to look at his mother. Something passed between them, a look that contained years of shared decisions, shared strategies, shared willingness to do what needed to be done, and what Clara saw in that look was not love. It had never been love. It was the look of two people who have been useful to each other and are calculating whether that usefulness has expired. "What communications?" Marcus said, to his mother, not to Silas. Victoria said nothing. "Mother." His voice was different now. The professional smoothness was gone entirely. "What is he talking about?" "This is not the place," Victoria said tightly. "You talked to my accountant," Marcus said, "in March, without telling me." "Marcus, lower your voice." "What did you do?" It was not a question. It had the quality of something breaking open, not explosively, but with the slow, irreversible crack of something under too much pressure for too long. Silas stepped back slightly. Clara felt it, the deliberate step, the choice to give the Sterling family the room to implode in front of witnesses. It was not cruelty, it was precision. The room watched. 400 people, the cream of New York's financial and social world, watched Marcus Sterling's face as the architecture of his life revealed itself to be built on something other than what he had believed. His allies had drifted. His legal team at the table behind him had gone very still. Gerald Foss was on the phone again, and the expression on Gerald's face was the expression of a man who has decided to be somewhere else. Sophia Vance had not moved from the table. She was sitting with her hands folded in front of her, and her face composed into something that looked from a distance like calm. Clara looked at her across the room and understood immediately that Sophia's calm was the calm of a person running internal calculations at speed, assessing damage mapping exits, deciding what could be salvaged and what needed to be abandoned. Their eyes met. And Clara watched something happen in Sophia's face that she had not expected. Not fear exactly, not guilt, something more complicated, something that looked for just a moment like recognition, like two people looking at each other across the wreckage of the same disaster from opposite sides. Clara looked away. "There's one more thing," Silas said. He spoke to the room now, not loudly, not performatively, but with the natural authority of a man who has never needed a microphone. The conversations that were still running had stopped. The circle of silence was complete. Sterling Tech's quarterly filing from 6 weeks ago contains discrepancies that the SEC will be interested in. The documentation has been submitted. He looked at Marcus. "I want to be clear, this is not personal. This is consequential. There is a difference." Marcus said, "You're doing this because of tonight, because of Clara." "I'm doing this," Silas said, "because it needed to be done. Tonight simply determined the timing." He looked at his granddaughter. "Clara." She stepped forward. One step, just one, just enough to stand in her own space rather than beside him, to be her own thing in the room rather than an extension of someone else. She looked at Marcus Sterling, her husband of 7 years, the man who had told 400 people she was trash and had her removed from a building and had gone back to his champagne, and smiled. She had prepared words in the lobby while Silas was making phone calls. She had thought about what she would say. She had imagined something precise and devastating, something that would capture 7 years in a sentence, something that would land in the room and not leave. But standing here looking at his face, at the pale, exposed, recalculating face of a man who has just understood the full scope of his mistake, she found that she didn't want to be devastating. She was tired of the weight of it. She had been carrying it for years, and she was putting it down. "I don't hate you, Marcus," she said. Her voice was clear and steady and carried in the silent room. "I think I should, and I don't. I think I just feel sorry for you." She paused. "You threw away a person tonight in front of everyone because you thought you could afford to. You thought I was something you could discard." Another pause. "I need you to understand that you were wrong about what I was, and I need you to understand that I've known for a very long time what you are." She held his gaze for 3 seconds. Then she looked away. She looked out at the room, at the 400 people who had watched her be humiliated 2 hours ago, and were now watching her stand in the center of it all with her ruined dress and her bare feet and her grandfather's name, and she felt something complete itself inside her, something that had been unfinished for a long time. A woman near the middle of the room began to clap. A single person, then two, then a sound that moved through the crowd with the same ripple that had greeted Clara's entrance. Except this ripple was different. This one went up. Marcus stood in the center of it and was very still. James Whitfield appeared at his shoulder and said something quietly. Marcus did not respond. He was looking at Clara with an expression that she had no name for, that might have been, if you were generous, the beginning of understanding. The first glimpse of a man seeing his own reflection clearly for perhaps the first time. Victoria Sterling had moved away. Clara noted her absence without surprise. Victoria was a woman of strategic retreats. She had always been better at leaving a room than explaining herself. Silas touched Clara's elbow lightly. "Are you all right?" he said close to her ear. She thought about it honestly. She checked the way you check after a long run, internally cataloging what hurts and what has held. And what she found surprised her. "Yes," she said, and meant it in a way she hadn't meant anything in a very long time. "I think I actually am." "Good." He offered her his arm. "Then let's go. We have a great deal of work to begin." She took his arm. They walked toward the exit, not the rushed walk of people escaping, but the unhurried walk of people who are done with a room and have somewhere better to be. The crowd parted again the same way it had parted when they entered, but this time the energy was different. People stepped aside with the instinctive deference of a room that has collectively recalculated something and arrived at a new conclusion. Near the door, a woman stopped Clara's 60s, silver hair, the bearing of someone who has sat on the boards of significant institutions. Clara didn't know her name. The woman put her hand on Clara's arm briefly and said very quietly, "Good for you." That was all. Then she stepped back and let them pass. Clara did not look back as they went through the door. Behind her, she heard Marcus's voice, once tight and urgent, saying something to James Whitfield that she couldn't make out. She heard the specific silence of a room that has witnessed something significant and is still absorbing it the way you absorb something that has rearranged your understanding. She did not look back. In the lobby, Silas's men were already at the entrance. One of them held Clara's coat, retrieved, she realized, from the cloakroom, the coat she had left behind when they pushed her out. She put it on. It was warm. It smelled like the coat she had packed for herself that morning 100 years ago, before the gala, before any of this. "There are people coming tomorrow," Silas said as they moved toward the entrance. "Attorneys, financial advisors, people who will need to walk you through the scope of what you're inheriting." He glanced at her. "It will be a great deal of information." "I know," she said. "It will also be a great deal of responsibility." "I know that, too." He looked at her for a moment. "Are you frightened?" She thought about it honestly, the way she had been thinking about things honestly all evening. Not the comfortable dishonesty of 4 years of staying, but the real thing, the version that doesn't soften the hard parts. "Yes," she said, "but not of the responsibility." She looked at him. "I'm frightened I'll wake up, and this will have been something I imagined." Silas Thorne stopped walking. He turned to face her fully, this woman, who was his daughter's daughter, who had his daughter's eyes and his daughter's spine and 15 years of damage on top of it, that she was already clearly beginning to shed like something she had borrowed and was returning. "It's real," he said, "all of it, and I am not going anywhere." Clara held his gaze, and for the first time since she was 23 years old, standing at a graveside in the rain, while a grief too large for her body looked at her from her grandfather's face, for the first time in 15 years, she let herself believe something good without immediately bracing for it to be taken away. The revolving door turned. They walked out into the night. Behind them, the St. Regis Hotel continued lights music, the hum of 400 people who had just witnessed the first act of something none of them fully understood yet. Marcus Sterling stood in the center of it, his CFO on one side and his lawyer on the other. His mother, nowhere to be found, and Sophia Vance still at the table with her hands folded and her phone face down, deciding in the private silence of her own calculations which way to move. The rain had stopped. Clara looked up at the sky, cleared now, the way skies clear after a long storm, with that particular sharp cleanness in the air that makes the city look like a different city, like something that has been washed and is still wet and is catching the light differently than it did before. She breathed it in. Silas's hand found her shoulder briefly, one touch warm and steady, the same steadiness she had carried in her memory for 15 years. Then he moved toward the vehicle, and she followed, and the door opened, and the warmth was there again, and the city moved around them, enormous and indifferent, and full of things that had not happened yet. Her phone buzzed. She looked at it. It was not Marcus. It was a number she didn't recognize, another 2, one too different from before. She answered it. "Ms. Thorne." A woman's voice, professional, brisk. Clara paused. "Ms. Thorne. Not Sterling, Thorne, her mother's name, her name given back to her." "Yes," she said. The word felt different in her mouth than it had ever felt. "This is Clara Thorne." The woman on the phone introduced herself as Diana Holt, senior counsel at Thorne Group's legal division, and she spoke with the efficient warmth of someone who had been waiting to make this particular call for a long time and was glad it had finally arrived. "I know the timing is unusual," Diana said, "but Mr. Thorne asked me to reach you directly tonight. There are documents that need your signature before Monday's market open. We can do everything electronically if you prefer, or we can meet in person first thing tomorrow." "In person," Clara said without hesitating. She was done with things happening at a distance. She was done with important things being handled, indirectly managed by other people, arranged without her presence. "Tomorrow morning, whatever time works." 7 a.m., Diana said. "Thorne Group offices, 57th and Park." "I'll be there." She hung up. Silas was watching her from across the vehicle with the particular attention of someone who is not checking on a person, but simply choosing to pay them the respect of full presence. Clara noticed this about him, that he did not look away when things got complicated. Most people in her life had developed a habit of looking away precisely when things got complicated. She was understanding one of the ways that harm sustains itself. Everyone looks away at the same moment, and the person in the center of it is left alone inside the damage. 7 a.m. with Diana, Silas said. It was not a question. Yes, he nodded. She's the best I have. She'll walk you through everything clearly. Ask her anything, she won't rush you. He paused. Are you hungry? You haven't eaten. The question was so ordinary, so simply human that Clara felt it in her throat. After everything, the ballroom, the rain, the confrontation, the room applauding after all of that enormous machinery of consequence and revelation, her grandfather was asking if she had eaten. She laughed. It came out slightly ragged at the edges, the laugh of someone who has been holding themselves very tightly for a very long time and is just beginning to let the grip ease. No, she said. I haven't eaten since noon. Then we'll fix that first, he said. Everything else can wait 45 minutes. They went to a restaurant 3 blocks from the hotel, not a grand one, not a place designed to impress, but a small Italian place on a side street that Silas clearly knew well, because the host greeted him by name and led them to a corner table without being asked and brought bread and water without being told. Clara ate. Real food, warm bread, a bowl of pasta that she consumed with the focused attention of someone who has rediscovered a basic bodily need and is taking it seriously. Silas had soup. He watched her eat with quiet satisfaction the way that people who love you watch you do ordinary things. They didn't talk much. Clara found that she didn't need to fill the silence, and that discovery was itself significant. She had spent years filling silences, managing them, making sure they didn't land in ways that would cost her. Silence with Marcus had always been a landscape to navigate. Silence with Silas was simply silence. It had no charge to it. At 9:47, her phone lit up with Marcus's name. She looked at it. She let it ring. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. At 9:51, it rang again. Same name. Silas looked at the phone on the table between them. You don't have to answer it, he said. I know, she said. That's why I'm not. The third call came at 9:59. She turned the phone face down. He'll want to negotiate, Silas said. He'll want to meet privately, work something out, find a version of events where he retains control of the narrative. It's what men like Marcus do when the ground moves. They try to find a table where they can rearrange the pieces. He broke a piece of bread. Don't meet him privately, not without Diana present. I wasn't planning to, Clara said. Good. He looked at her. Are you planning to divorce him? The word divorce. She had thought it thousands of times over the past 2 years, turned it over in her mind late at night, examined it, put it back. Every time she had put it back, it was because the math didn't work. She had no money of her own. She had no family to go to. The apartment was his. The accounts were his. The lawyer she had consulted briefly 18 months ago had said very carefully that a divorce from Marcus Sterling would likely be a prolonged and expensive process that would leave her with significantly less than she might hope for. So she had put the word back every time and gone back to standing beside him at parties straightening his tie. The math was different now. Yes, she said. It came out clean and final like a date on a calendar, something decided, not something being considered. Silas nodded once. Diana will handle it. She'll also ensure that any attempt Marcus makes to reclassify marital assets or accelerate the prenuptial agreement is challenged appropriately. He paused. The prenuptial agreement your mother-in-law arranged without your full legal counsel present, by the way, has significant enforceability issues. Diana identified 3 of them. Clara stared at him. You've already been working on this. For 7 months, he said, since I found you. You found me 7 months ago, she said slowly, and you waited. I told you why. You needed me to be ready to leave on my own terms. She looked at him steadily. But 7 months, grandfather. 7 months of watching. 7 months of watching was the hardest thing I have done in a long time, he said. His voice was quiet and direct, and she understood looking at his face that he was telling the truth without softening it. I wanted to come sooner. Every week I wanted to come sooner. But I watched you, and I saw what I saw, and I knew that if I came before you were ready, before you had found the thing inside yourself that would let you stand up in that room and say no, then we might get you out, but we wouldn't get you back. He looked at her. I wanted my granddaughter back. Not just her body in a safe location. Her. Clara held his gaze for a long moment. Then she said, "You got her." Silas Thorne looked at his granddaughter across a small table in a side street restaurant in New York City, and for just a moment, just one unguarded moment, his face showed all of it. 15 years. The grief of losing a daughter. The long search. The watching and the waiting and the patience that had cost him something real. It was there, and then it was managed again back behind the steadiness, but she had seen it. "Yes," he said, "I did." They paid and left at 10:23. By 10:23, inside what remained of the Sterling Tech Empire's Friday night, Richard Cho was on his 4th call with the company's banking relationships, and each conversation was worse than the last. The Thorne Group's moves had been surgical, not broad spectrum, not the financial equivalent of a bomb, but precise, targeted. Every position hit something load-bearing. Richard had spent 20 years in corporate finance, and he recognized craftsmanship when he saw it, even when the craftsmanship was aimed at dismantling something he worked for. Whoever had designed those moves had known Sterling Tech's financial architecture intimately, had known exactly where the weight was, and exactly what to remove to make the whole structure creak. He sent Marcus a message at 10:26, "We need to talk tonight, not tomorrow, tonight." Marcus was in a car. He had left the St. Regis 20 minutes after Clara, after it became clear that remaining in the ballroom served no purpose except to continue being the object of the room's recalculated attention, which was an experience he had no framework for and no interest in prolonging. James Whitfield was beside him in the back seat. Sophia had left separately. He had watched her go without stopping her, without saying anything, which was its own kind of message. "Walk me through the worst case," Marcus said to James. James had the particular composure of a very good attorney facing a client who does not yet understand how serious things are and must be brought to that understanding carefully. The SEC referral is the most urgent piece. If the documentation Thorne's team submitted is what he implied it is, what did he imply? The quarterly filing discrepancies, the asset reclassifications. James paused. "Marcus, I need to ask you directly, are there things in the last 18 months of Sterling Tech's books that an SEC examination would find problematic?" Silence in the car. The city moved past the windows. "Marcus," James said again. "There are things that could be interpreted in more than one way," Marcus said carefully. James closed his eyes briefly. "All right," he said. "All right." He opened them. "Then the worst case includes criminal exposure, not just civil, and in that context, the divorce proceedings which will begin, I have no doubt within days, become significantly more complicated, because any asset concealment in the marriage becomes evidence of a broader pattern of—" "I understand," Marcus said. "Do you?" James said. He said it without sharpness, just with the particular exhaustion of a man who has had to make sure his clients genuinely understand things too many times. "Because I want to be certain you understand that this is not a negotiation situation, Marcus. Silas Thorne did not come to that ballroom to negotiate. He came to demonstrate something. The question of what you do next is very different from the question of what you could have done differently, and I need you to be living in the first question." Marcus looked out the window. "What does he want?" Marcus said. "Thorne, what does he actually want?" "I think," James said carefully, "that what he wants is already happening." Marcus's phone lit up with Richard's message. He read it. He looked at the screen for a long moment, and then he did something he had not done in recent memory. He put the phone down without responding, and sat in the dark of the car, and breathed, and did not perform anything for anyone. The car moved through the city. The city did not care. At 11:15, Sophia Vance arrived at her father's apartment on Central Park West. Edward Vance was 64 years old and had built his private banking empire on the principle that information is the only currency that doesn't devalue, and he had raised his daughter in that faith. He opened the door before she could knock, which meant he had already been awake, which meant he already knew some version of what had happened. "Tell me," he said. Sophia sat down. She did not take off her coat. She looked at her father with the expression of someone who has spent the car ride running the numbers and has arrived at a figure she doesn't like. "Silas Thorne came to the gala tonight," she said. With Marcus's wife. His wife is Thorne's granddaughter. Edward Vance was quiet for exactly 4 seconds. Silas Thorne's granddaughter, he said. His sole heir. The documents are already in place. Another silence. Edward sat down across from his daughter. He looked at her the way he always looked at her when a situation had become serious, not with alarm, because Edward Vance did not do alarm, but with the focused attention of a man reorienting toward a new reality. The Vance family's involvement with Sterling Tech, he said slowly, needs to be disentangled, Sophia said, cleanly and quickly. How much does Thorne know? Sophia looked at her father. He knew about the prenuptial arrangement Victoria Sterling made. He knew about the asset reclassifications. He mentioned March communications between the estate attorney and Marcus's accountant. She paused. The March communications involved your bank dad. Edward Vance stood up. He crossed to his desk and picked up his phone. I'll have legal on the phone in 10 minutes, he said. And Sophia. He turned to look at his daughter. Your involvement with Marcus Sterling ends tonight. Not winds down. Tonight. I know, she said. I mean personally as well. She looked at her father for a moment, then she looked away. I know, she said again. Edward nodded. He turned back to his phone, and Sophia sat in her coat in her father's apartment and stared at a fixed point on the wall and thought for the first time with genuine clarity about what she had done to a woman she had dismissed entirely. A woman who had turned out to be the kind of person who walks back into a room after being humiliated and stands in the center of it with bare feet and a ruined dress and does not look at the floor. Sophia had not expected that. She had expected someone smaller. She had expected someone broken. She had been wrong. The next morning arrived cold and clear the way New York mornings arrive after rain, with a specific quality of freshness that the city earns rarely and spends quickly. Clara was at the Thorne Group offices at 6:52. She had slept, which surprised her not well, not deeply, but genuinely in the guest room of Silas's Fifth Avenue apartment, in a bed with clean sheets and a door that locked from the inside, which was a detail she had registered consciously and with a feeling she was still learning to name. She had woken at 5:30, showered borrowed clothes that Diana Holt had apparently arranged to be delivered, professional, perfectly fitted, a dark blazer and trousers that felt like armor of the good kind armor you wear, not because you're afraid, but because you mean business. She had stood in front of the mirror at 6:15 and looked at herself for a long time. Not at the dress, not at the hair or the makeup or any of the external things that she had spent years adjusting and perfecting in the hope that the right surface would make up for the wrong situation. She had looked at her own face, just her face straight on the way you rarely actually look at yourself. The woman looking back at her was 38 years old. She had her mother's eyes. She knew this because Silas had told her so, and because she had found a photograph in the apartment on a side table, her mother young and laughing at something. And the eyes were exactly the same. She had lines that hadn't been there 5 years ago. She had the look of someone who has been carrying something heavy and has just set it down and is still in the process of understanding what her body feels like without the weight. She looked like someone who had survived. She looked like someone who was done surviving and was ready to do something else entirely. At 6:52, she walked into the Thorne Group offices, and the receptionist stood when she entered, stood without being told to, with the automatic deference of someone who has been briefed and understands exactly who is walking through the door. Ms. Thorne, the receptionist said, Diana is ready for you. Can I get you coffee? Please, Clara said. Black. Diana Holt was 52 sharp-featured, with the particular organized energy of someone who processes information faster than most people generate it. She had an entire conference table covered in documents, organized, labeled flagged, with color-coded tabs, and she stood when Clara entered and shook her hand with both of hers and said, I've been looking forward to this meeting for 7 months. Sit down and let's get you up to speed. For the next 3 hours, Clara learned the shape of her life. The Thorne Group was not one company. It was a structure, a network of holdings, subsidiaries, investments, real estate, private equity positions, and strategic partnerships that had been built over 50 years, with the particular patience of a man who understood that real wealth is not accumulated, but grown. Clara received the summary figures and sat with them for a moment in silence before she trusted herself to respond. "This is real," she said finally, not a question. "Every dollar of it," Diana said, "and it's mine. Your grandfather has been transferring controlling interests to your trust for the past 4 years in anticipation of this conversation. The transfers are complete. The documentation is filed. The only things requiring your signature today are the formal acceptance documents and the updated board designations." Diana looked at her steadily. "You are, as of your signature, the controlling stakeholder of the Thorn Group. Your grandfather retains an advisory role for as long as he chooses, but operational authority passes to you on a timeline of your choosing. Xiaomi, demain suffisa." Clara looked at the signature pages Diana slid toward her. She picked up the pen. She thought about the apartment she would not be returning to. She thought about 7 years of standing slightly behind Marcus's left shoulder, visible enough to be seen and invisible enough to be ignored. She thought about the word garbage spoken into a microphone in front of 400 people. She thought about $40 and a cracked phone and a broken heel in the rain. She signed. At 10:15 that same morning, Marcus Sterling arrived at his lawyer's office on 49th Street to find that James Whitfield was not alone. There were 2 other attorneys present, both of whose names Marcus recognized from their reputations in corporate law, and a man he didn't know who introduced himself as a forensic accountant. The expression on James's face said everything the faces in the room were too professional to say directly. "Sit down, Marcus," James said. Marcus sat. "The SEC inquiry is formal as of 9 a.m. this morning," James said. "We received notification 20 minutes ago. The documentation submitted by the Thorn Group's legal team was comprehensive." He paused. "Marcus, I need you to understand that the posture we take in the next 72 hours determines a great deal about how this resolves. I need you to be completely honest with me about everything. Not the version that sounds best. Everything." Marcus looked around the room, at the attorneys, at the accountant, at the table covered in documents that he recognized his own documents, somehow copies of things that had lived in secured servers that he had believed were inaccessible. "How did they get those?" he said. James said nothing. "James, how did Thorn's team get those documents?" James folded his hands on the table. "Marcus," he said, "that is not the most important question you should be asking right now." Marcus looked at the documents. He looked at his own signature on things he had signed, at moments when they had seemed like reasonable decisions, moments when the calculus had been clear, and the risk had seemed manageable, and the future had seemed like something he was building, rather than something that was already built, and he simply hadn't been told. Victoria, the March communications, the estate attorney. He picked up his phone and called his mother. It rang 6 times. Voicemail. He called again, 6 rings, voicemail. He set the phone on the table and looked at James Whitfield. "Tell me," he said, "what my options are." James opened a folder. "Your options are significantly constrained," he said, "but they exist." First, Marcus's phone lit up on the table. Not his mother, a number he didn't recognize. He reached for it automatically. James said, "Don't." Marcus answered it. The voice on the other end was not Silas Thorne's. It was a woman's professional brisk, and she said, "Mr. Sterling, this is Diana Holt, Senior Counsel for the Thorn Group. I'm calling as a courtesy to inform you that Clara Thorne has this morning signed the formal documents accepting her position as controlling stakeholder of the Thorn Group. Additionally, divorce proceedings will be filed on her behalf by end of business today. You will receive those documents through your attorney of record." A brief pause. "We also want to inform you that any attempt to access, transfer, or reclassify assets from joint marital accounts effective immediately will be considered in violation of the automatic stay provisions that accompany the filing. Have a good morning." The call ended. Marcus held the phone. Everyone at the table was looking at him. "Divorce papers," he said. His voice had gone flat and strange. "End of business today." James Whitfield nodded slowly. "Then we add that to the list of things we're managing," he said. "Marcus, look at me." He waited until Marcus did. "I need to know right now, is there anything else I don't know? Anything that could come out that would change the picture further?" The question hung in the air of the conference room. Marcus thought about Victoria. He thought about March. He thought about certain decisions made over 18 months that had seemed at the time like business and now sat in his chest like something with weight. "Yes," he said, quietly, flatly, with the particular exhaustion of someone who has been running a very long time and has stopped. James closed his eyes briefly, opened them. "Tell me everything," he said. And in the offices on 57th and Park, Clara Thorne signed the last of her acceptance documents and accepted a coffee from Diana Holt and sat in the conference room that would increasingly be her conference room and looked out at the city that spread below in the clear, cold morning light. She felt the specific weight of documents she had signed, not a burden, not the heavy thing she had feared responsibility might be, but something more like ground, something that would hold her up, something that was hers. Her phone was face up on the table. She saw the call she had just made and Diana setting down her own phone. She did not feel triumph. She had expected triumph and found instead something quieter, the feeling of a thing becoming true that had been true for a while without her knowledge and was simply now acknowledged. Diana said, "There's one more item for today. Your grandfather asked me to show you something." She slid a folder across the table. "These are the board positions that will open under your stewardship. The first two require your immediate attention. The third," Diana paused, something that might have been a smile moving briefly across her precise face. "The third is Sterling Tech. The Thorne Group holds a 7% stake acquired over the past 4 months. As controlling stakeholder, you now hold that position." Clara looked at the folder. 7% of Sterling Tech, the company Marcus had built, the company he had used as the architecture of his identity. She was now a stakeholder in it. "What does 7% mean practically?" she asked. "It means," Diana said, "that you have a seat at the table. You have a voice in governance. You have the ability to call for audits, request documentation, and in the current context of an SEC inquiry, your position as a stakeholder with fiduciary interests becomes highly relevant to how the investigation proceeds." Clara was quiet for a moment. "My grandfather thought of everything," she said. "He has been thinking about this for 7 months," Diana said. "He thinks very thoroughly." Clara looked at the board positions. She looked at her name printed cleanly at the top of each page, Clara Thorne, her mother's name, her name given back to her. She thought about 7 years of being Clara Sterling, of carrying that name like a garment she'd been handed at a door and had never quite found to fit. Clara Thorne. It fit. It had always fit. She had just forgotten it. She was still sitting with that thought when the conference room door opened and Silas Thorne walked in with 2 cups of coffee and the particular expression of a man who has set a very large and very carefully designed thing in motion and has arrived to confirm that it is moving exactly as intended. He set a coffee in front of her and sat down across from her and looked at his granddaughter sitting straight in her chair, documents signed, phone face up on the table, with the call completed, her hands steady and her face clear, and he said nothing for a moment. He simply looked. "Well?" he said finally. "Well?" she said back. He smiled, a real one. "There's a board meeting in 3 weeks, he said. "I'd like you there." "I'll be there," she said. "And there's a great deal you need to learn between now and then." "I know," she said. "I'm ready." Silas Thorne looked at his granddaughter for a long moment, and then he said something he had been waiting to say for 15 years, something he had rehearsed in his mind so many times that it had become almost abstract, almost theoretical until this morning, until this room, until this woman sitting across from him with his daughter's eyes and her own spine, and something new in her face that had not been there last night, something that had arrived quietly, the way important things often do. "Your mother," he said, "would have loved to see this." Clara's throat tightened. She breathed through it. She did not look away. "Tell me about her," she said. "Tell me about her today. I want to know everything I missed." And Silas Thorne, 81 years old, sat back in his chair in the morning light and began to talk, and Clara leaned forward and listened, and outside the city continued in its enormous and indifferent way, and inside something that had been broken for 15 years was being carefully and unhurriedly and with great attention made whole. 3 weeks moved faster than Clara expected. Not because the days were short. They were not short. They were the longest days she had lived in years, packed with information and decisions and introductions and documents and conversations that required her full attention from the moment she sat down at her desk each morning to the moment she finally set down her pen each night. They were long days, but they moved with purpose, and purpose has a different relationship with time than waiting does. She had spent 7 years waiting. She had forgotten what it felt like to move. Diana Holt became the organizing principle of her mornings. Every day at 7, a briefing, the shape of the day, the names she needed to know the decisions that required her input versus the ones that could be delegated. Diana was not gentle about the volume of information, and Clara was grateful for that. She did not want to be managed slowly. She wanted to understand the things she was responsible for completely and quickly, and Diana had recognized this within the first 48 hours and had calibrated accordingly. Silas came to the office every morning at 9. He had his own office 2 doors down from hers. His office, the one he had occupied for decades, the one with the view of Park Avenue and the bookshelves that held 40 years of decisions. He did not hover. He did not manage. He arrived, he worked, he was available when she needed him, and he left her alone when she didn't. It was the architecture of support done correctly present without suffocating steady, without controlling. Clara absorbed this too, filed it away. She was learning what good looked like. She was learning it from the inside. The divorce papers had been served to Marcus on the evening of the gala exactly as Diana had promised. His attorney had responded within 24 hours with a request for a meeting. Clara had relayed this to Diana, who had said, "No private meetings. Any communication goes through us." Clara had relayed this to no one because she did not speak to Marcus directly. She did not take his calls. She had 3 of them the first week, each one going to voicemail, each voicemail unlistened to. Diana listened to them on her behalf and summarized them with efficient brevity. The first was an apology. The second was a negotiation attempt. The third was something Diana described as increasingly emotional, not strategically useful. After the third, the calls stopped. Marcus had other things to occupy him by then. The SEC inquiry had moved from preliminary to formal investigation within 6 days. Richard Cho, faced with the particular choice that middle-level executives face when the structure above them begins to fail, had made the decision that accountants and CFOs often make in these situations. He cooperated. Fully. With documentation. The asset reclassifications, the quarterly filing discrepancies, the arrangement between Victoria's estate attorney and Marcus's personal accountant in March, all of it came into the light with the particular inevitability of things that were always going to come into the light and had simply been waiting for a reason. Victoria Sterling was arrested on a Thursday morning 2 weeks after the gala. Clara heard about it from Diana, who told her in the same brisk tone she used for everything, not without compassion but without drama, because Diana Holt understood that the most respectful thing you can do with difficult information is deliver it clearly and let the person receiving it have their own response. Clara's response surprised her. She sat with it for a moment, the information that the woman who had spent 4 years of holiday dinners finding new ways to make her feel small, who had called her tired and out of place and invisible, who had maneuvered a fraudulent prenuptial agreement and arranged back-channel communications to protect her son's money at the expense of his wife. She sat with the information that this woman was now facing charges, and what she felt was not satisfaction. What she felt was tired. A clean tiredness, not the exhausted kind that had lived in her bones for years, but the tiredness that comes after something large and necessary has been completed. The tiredness of someone who has carried something heavy to where it needed to go and has set it down. "Is she all right?" Clara asked Diana. Diana paused. "She's been released on bail. She has counsel." "Okay," Clara said, and went back to the document she had been reviewing. That was the moment Clara understood something about herself that she had not known before, that she was not a person who needed her enemies to suffer. She needed them to be held accountable. She needed the wrong thing to stop. She did not need to watch. She did not need the satisfaction. She needed to be somewhere else building something while the consequences of other people's choices worked themselves out in the appropriate rooms with the appropriate people. She was learning what power actually felt like, not the performance of it, the practice. The board meeting was on a Tuesday 3 weeks and 1 day after the night of the gala. Clara arrived first. She always arrived first to things. Now it had become a habit of the 3 weeks born, partly from the practical reality that there was always more to review before any meeting, and partly from something more personal. She wanted to be in the room before everyone else. She wanted to already be settled, already present, already herself before others arrived. For 7 years, she had been perpetually arriving into situations someone else had defined. She was done with that. The Thorn Group board was 14 people. Clara had met them all individually over the 3 weeks, some in this building, some over calls too, who had flown in specifically to meet her. They were a varied group. Several were older than she was, with the practiced caution of people who had been making large decisions for a long time and had learned to take the temperature of a room before they committed to anything. A few were closer to her age, with the particular hunger of people who had climbed far and intended to climb further. All of them had been watching her for 3 weeks in the way that people watch someone who is about to have authority over them, looking for competence, for weakness, for what kind of person she would be to work with. She had been watching them back. Silas came in at 7:58, 2 minutes before the meeting was scheduled to begin, and took the seat to her right. He had done this deliberately, not the head of the table, not the center, but the seat that said advisor support present, but not leading. It was another thing she filed away. He was exceptionally good at this, at giving her the room she needed, without ever making her feel that she was in it alone. The meeting was called to order at 8 a.m. precisely. Clara spoke for the first 40 minutes. She had prepared, and the preparation showed not in a stiff, memorized way, but in the way that genuine understanding shows when it's communicated by someone who has absorbed something and made it their own. She walked the board through her assessment of the group's current position, the 3 areas she intended to prioritize in the first quarter of her stewardship, and the specific structural change she was proposing to the Oversight Committee that she believed had been needed for several years. She had this from a 7-month-old internal review document that Silas had shown her in her first week, a document that had been noted by several board members at the time and then quietly shelved. She brought it back. She had reasons for each decision, and she gave those reasons clearly, and when she was finished, she asked for questions. There were many questions. She answered all of them. One of the older board members, a man named Arthur Calloway, who had been on the board for 19 years and had the particular habit of testing new leadership with questions that sounded simple and weren't waited until the others had asked their questions, and then said, "Ms. Thorne, you've been in this building for 3 weeks. What makes you confident that 3 weeks is sufficient preparation to lead an organization of this scope?" The room went slightly still. It was the question they had all been holding, and Arthur had said it out loud. Clara looked at him. She did not pause to collect herself because she did not need to. She had thought about this, had thought about it at 5 in the morning in the guest room that was becoming. Her room had thought about it on the phone with Diana, had thought about it the night before, while going over the board materials for the 4th time. "Nothing," she said. "3 weeks is not sufficient preparation. It never will be." She kept her eyes on Arthur. "But I have something that no amount of preparation provides. I have the name on the door, and I have my grandfather's 50 years of institutional knowledge available to me every day. And I have the particular motivation of someone who has recently been reminded very publicly of exactly what happens when you underestimate what a person is capable of." She paused. "I am not going to be a perfect CEO in my first quarter. I am going to be a present one, a listening one, an honest one. And I'm going to make decisions that I can explain clearly, and when I'm wrong, I'm going to say so and correct it. That is what I can offer you right now." Another pause. "Does that answer your question, Arthur?" Arthur Calloway looked at her for a long moment. Then something shifted in his face, not softening exactly, but something that recognized something. The expression of a man who has been testing and has received the kind of answer that makes the test irrelevant. "It does," he said. The vote to formally seat Clara Thorne as CEO of the Thorne Group was unanimous, 14-0. The motion passed at 10:22 a.m. on a Tuesday 3 weeks, and one day after a man had grabbed a microphone in a ballroom and called his wife garbage. Clara sat with the result for exactly 3 seconds. Then she said, "Good, let's talk about the infrastructure review," and the meeting continued. Silas caught her eye across the table and said nothing. He didn't need to. The months that followed moved with the particular rhythm of a life that has found its purpose and is building inside it. Clara did not become a perfect CEO. She had been honest about that. She made mistakes, 2 significant ones in the first quarter alone, both of which she identified before Diana did, both of which she corrected publicly and without deflection. The board watched this and recalibrated upward. This was another thing she was learning, that the willingness to say I was wrong, clearly and without performance, is one of the rarer and more valuable things a leader can demonstrate. She had 7 years of experience with people who were constitutionally incapable of it. She had a strong working model of what it cost. She moved out of Silas's guest room and into an apartment of her own in early December, a place in the West Village with high ceilings and a kitchen she intended to actually use, and a guest room for Silas because the relationship they were rebuilding had a directionality to it, and she intended to make sure it ran both ways. She furnished it slowly, deliberately, choosing each thing herself. This was small, but not small. She had spent years in rooms that other people had furnished, wearing the aesthetic choices of a life that had been designed without her genuine input. Choosing her own furniture was in its quiet way a declaration. The divorce was finalized in January. Marcus's attorneys had attempted 3 different strategies over the course of the proceedings: the prenuptial, the asset defense, and finally a claim of emotional distress that James Whitfield had clearly advised against, and that Marcus had apparently insisted on anyway, which told Clara everything she needed to know about how he was navigating the loss of control. Diana handled all 3 strategies with the efficient calm of someone clearing a table. The prenuptial, with its 3 enforceability issues, collapsed first. The asset defense fell apart when the forensic accounting produced documentation that Marcus's own CFO had cooperated in providing. The emotional distress claim was withdrawn before it reached the judge. Clara walked out of the courthouse on a January afternoon with the divorce decree in Diana's hands, and a coat she had bought herself, and a sense of lightness that she had no metaphor for, because every metaphor felt insufficient. She was not happy about the divorce exactly. She had not been happy about the marriage for a long time, which meant in some structural sense she had not been happy for a long time, and the divorce did not produce happiness so much as it produced space, room, the possibility of something that might eventually become happiness. She would take it. Marcus Sterling's public life was narrowing by the day. The SEC investigation produced charges in February, 2 counts of securities fraud, and 1 of financial misrepresentation. His lawyer negotiated. The negotiations were ongoing, and were by all accounts not going well for Marcus. Sterling Tech's stock had moved in ways that the market understood as a vote of no confidence. 2 of its largest institutional investors had restructured their positions. The company was not dead, it was still operating, still had revenue, still had people who believed in the underlying business, but the architecture Marcus had built on top of it, the financial engineering and the relationships and the optics management, had been exposed as something other than what it appeared. And markets like people do not quickly forgive the discovery of that particular gap. Sophia Vance had not been seen at any significant social event since October. Her father's bank had quietly divested from several of the positions that had connected it to Sterling Tech's financial arrangements. Sophia herself had moved to London, which the New York social world interpreted as the move. It was not an adventure, but an exit. Clara did not think about Sophia often. When she did, she thought about that look across the ballroom, the recognition, the 2 people seeing each other clearly from opposite sides of a disaster, and she thought, I hope she does something better with it than she did before. It was an honest thought. It surprised her. She let it stand. In March, 5 months after the night of the gala, Clara took her first solo trip as CEO. She flew to London for a series of meetings with 3 of the Thorne Group's European partners, long-established relationships that had never met her, that had known the name Thorne for decades, and that had been watching the transition with the particular attention of people who have significant money in something and want to understand the new hand holding it. She spent 3 days in meetings. She was tired every night. She was fully alive every morning. In the gap between those 2 things, the tiredness and the aliveness, she found something she recognized from a very long time ago, from before she was Marcus's wife, from before she was anyone's anything. She recognized herself, the version of herself that existed before she had learned to make herself small enough to fit inside someone else's life. On the last night in London, she called Silas. "How did it go?" he said. "Good," she said. "Better than good. The Hartley Group wants to expand the partnership. I said I'd bring a proposal back within 30 days. That's been stalled for 2 years, he said. I know. I read the file. A pause. She could hear the smile in his silence. What did you say to them? I told them the truth, she said. I told them the previous arrangement had been structured around priorities that no longer reflected where the Thorn Group was going, and that I was interested in building something new that actually served both parties rather than just maintaining the appearance of a partnership. A pause. Richard Hartley said that was the most direct thing anyone from our side had said to him in 5 years. It probably was, Silas said. He liked it, she said. People who are tired of being managed tend to like being spoken to honestly, Silas said. It's one of the most reliable things about human beings. She looked out her hotel window at the city below. Not her city, but a city alive and enormous and indifferent in the way she had come to find comforting rather than isolating. She thought about a night 5 months ago when she had stood outside a different hotel in a different city, soaked through with $40 and a cracked phone, pressing her fingers against her collarbone like she was trying to hold something in. She thought about the stone beneath her sternum that had sat there for so long it had felt structural. It was gone. Had been gone since that night. She had checked for it sometimes in the early weeks the way you check a sore tooth with your tongue, probing to confirm the pain is still there, and it was simply not there. Something had left her when she said no in the middle of that ballroom. Something had vacated the premises and not returned, and what had taken its place was not absence, but presence, her own. Grandfather, she said. Thank you for waiting. A silence on the line. The particular silence of an 81-year-old man receiving something he has wanted for 15 years and has learned enough patience to simply hold. Thank you for coming back, he said. She returned to New York on a Friday. The Thorn Group offices on 57th Street were quiet in the early evening when she arrived. Most of the staff had gone the weekend, beginning its slow claim on the building. She went up to her floor anyway because she had gotten into the habit of an end-of-week review, 30 minutes alone with the week's decisions, checking what had worked and what would need to be different. She sat at her desk. Her desk, dark wood clean surface, her grandmother's photograph that Silas had given her in the first week, placed at the left corner where she could see it without looking directly at it, a presence rather than a focal point. She did the review, she made notes, she finished her coffee, she looked out at the city. New York was doing what New York always does at dusk in early spring, throwing light around with the particular generosity of a city that knows exactly how beautiful it can be when it tries. The buildings catching the late sun in ways that make them look like something other than buildings, something more like evidence of what human beings are capable of when they decide to build something that lasts. She thought about the first time she had come to the Thorn Group offices at 6:52 in the morning in borrowed clothes with a signed acceptance document in front of her. She thought about the board meeting Arthur Calloway's question and her own answer, the honest answer, the one she hadn't calculated but had simply told. She thought about the way the vote had felt when Diana read it 14-0, unanimous. She thought about her mother's eyes in the photograph on the side table. She thought about Silas saying your mother would have loved to see this, and herself saying tell me about her, and the two of them sitting in a conference room for 2 hours while her grandfather talked and she listened, and the morning moved around them like something alive. She thought about that gala, that rain, that blue dress, that broken heel held in her hand the decision to walk back in with it, rather than hide that it was broken. She had been thrown out of a room and had walked back in. She had been called nothing and had become something real. She had been discarded and had returned not to prove a point, but to live a life, her life, the one with her name on it, the one that had been waiting for her while she looked the other way. Her phone lit up. It was Diana. A message that said simply, board materials for Q2 review are ready when you are. No rush. Enjoy your weekend. Clara smiled. She typed back, Monday morning. 7 a.m. She turned off her desk lamp. She stood up. She put on her coat, the one she had bought herself, the good one, the one that fit correctly, and she picked up her bag and she walked to the elevator and pressed the button for the lobby. The elevator descended. The doors opened. The lobby of the Thorn Group building was marble and quiet, and hers not in the way that things are yours when you own them, but in the way that things are yours when you have earned the right to be inside them without apology, without performance, without the constant internal negotiation of a person who is not sure she belongs. She belonged. She had always belonged. She had simply taken a long way around to understanding it. She walked through the lobby and out into the New York evening, and the city received her the way it receives everyone indifferently, enormously, with no particular ceremony. And she walked into it without pressing her fingers against her collarbone, without the stone beneath her sternum, without the weight of 7 years of staying, and the longer weight of 15 years of being lost. Clara Thorne walked into the city that was hers, to move through with her name and her grandfather and her board and her desk and her mother's eyes, and the particular knowledge of a woman who has survived being discarded and has chosen deliberately and without hesitation to become someone who builds instead. She had been thrown out into the rain. She had come back a queen, and she was just getting started.